morning and welcome to Talking Point here on WESN, the Content Capsule. I'm Keaton Shaw. Welcome once more to the program. This morning we will be discussing the Education Facilities Company Limited and the news that broke on Monday that employees were given their termination letters, as well as the fact that the company is now closing down. And then later on in the program we will be examining the Russian-Ukrainian war and what it means for the Caribbean. But as we start this morning's proceedings, let me introduce my co-host, colleague, and good friend, Mr. Sean Michael Small. Good morning, Sean.
Good morning, Keaton. And just to backtrack a bit for a moment and acknowledge the fact that the fourth body has been found. It's a story that we've both found incredibly stunning. The language used in the report that they had to comb through thick crude, again, makes me wonder with regards to the industrial process or the equipment involved. They haven't told us exactly what these pipes were connected to or what could have been the cause of the suction. While I'm not necessarily too concerned about the actual practical details of how the men were killed just yet, what I am concerned is it seemed as though we're being insulated from information. And I would just like to know why. Are they trying to simplify things so that we don't get distracted from unnecessary information? Or are they trying to prevent uncomfortable questions that they either don't have the answer to yet or have suspicions for and don't want to reveal those suspicions for yet? So again, I'll leave it there. Please don't speculate further. But the fact that they had to comb through thick crude, it does leave me to wonder exactly just what went wrong and what was not in place.
Well, just to elaborate a bit further on what Sean was stating, just after 12:30 a.m. this morning, the body of Rishi Nagasar was recovered. Paria informed the family and then released a statement to the public. They've also included the fact that they have offered counseling to the family. Just to add to what you're stating, Sean, a couple of things. First of all, the independent investigation hopefully will assess everything down to the operations of the contracting company, the licensing, OSHA, as well as the management of Paria. Secondly, I would hope that it is also stated exactly what works were being conducted on specifically this pipeline, what was the purpose of this particular pipeline, and what was it serving? Exactly what did this pipe do? What was it for? Because as you mentioned, having to comb through slick crude oil, it tells me a lot more information. That one bit of information tells me a lot more than what we've heard over the last couple of days.
Yeah, they just say it's a U.
Yes.
Well, a U to what?
Exactly. So hopefully, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed in this, that independent report and investigation on international experts which are being hired on the part of the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries will reveal a lot more. But in the meantime, we again express our condolences to the family, but thankfully his body has been recovered.
Meanwhile, the manager who was named by the sons of one of the deceased, his house has been picketed. And I think it's an interesting lesson to learn because the police apparently came to the home, did not intervene. As far as I understand, the assembly was not in any way violent or raucous in any regard. And I do wonder what is the lesson that management, executives, and politicians are taking from this. Because if you go out front and maybe you are the front man to somebody else's bad decision, or it's your bad decision, you do have to realize, be prepared for some public scrutiny. And don't complain if you don't like how the public is now going to potentially blame you. So, communication. I'm not necessarily saying that Mr. Piper did anything wrong, except with regards to the overall communication has led us to this point, and this is the result. Whether rightfully or wrongfully, this gentleman's public image is now being heavily questioned. The board of Paria is being heavily questioned. The Minister of Energy is somewhat questioned by some people, not everybody. But the scrutiny comes when you make such horrible mistakes with regards to just simply communicating what is going on, both to the victims' families, but also to the public?
Well, as we conclude on this topic, and I'm not wanting to repeat myself as I have over the last couple of days, in relation to picketing outside this specific manager's home, I cannot see the need for police intervention because, first of all, whilst the Minister of Health has indicated that there was no double standard on the part of the government in relation to COVID-19 measures, the public health measures, and of course the Taste of Carnival, we explored the idea that what is still there is to prevent any sort of protest. And in this case, picketing can be deemed as a protest unless there's another definition of protest in terms of the legal jargon. But adding to that, if it was not rowdy, as you pointed out, if there was no violence or extreme behavior on the part of those who were picketing, I don't think it's constituting disturbing the peace. So I cannot see how the police will break up this protest or this picketing. And if they were to do it, again, that would also exacerbate an already frustrating situation of which has been touted negligence has played a major role. So I think the police I think the police presence was excellent on their part. Having a police presence is there to ensure that it didn't get out of hand. And if Mr. Piper had to leave his home or enter his home, they were also there. But should they have stopped it, that would have led to an escalation.
Well, then now what happens when a peaceful protest goes to the Red House?
Well,
one-man
that would be interesting.
One-man protest has been turned away. So now the door is open publicly by this action.
Well, you're not allowed to gather in a group of more than 10 individuals. So if 10 individuals in one group marches, and then you stay 6 feet apart, and then you have another group of 10. And by the way, I am not prescribing any loopholes in order for individuals to go out and protest. I must be very clear.
I mean,
in that statement.
that's not a loophole.
You know,
that is the regular. You are literally just repeating the regulation. And I will again repeat: one-man protests were turned away from the Red House. There is no concretion there. So.
Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, once more we express our condolences to the family of all 4 divers and to the family of Rishi Nagasar who would have received the news this morning. Our thoughts and prayers are with you always. At this point, we will take a very quick break, and when we return, we will explore the situation that has, well, it's the peak of the situation in relation to the Education Facilities Company Limited having closed their doors and terminated their employees. Interestingly enough, the CEO of EFCL has still remained very silent on this, but so has the ministries. So we'll explore that after this.
Gift giving during a lockdown can still be hassle-free with a gift from FanZone with delivery options available nationwide. Visit and browse our Facebook and Instagram pages for all your official licensed merchandise and apparel and have it delivered to your door. Find us on Facebook and Instagram. FanZone, we've got you covered.
The best for your baby is at thebesttoys.com. From the best strollers, car seats, baby carriers, high chairs, booster seats, rockers, jumpers and bouncers, walkers, baby blankets, feeding accessories, bathtubs. Visit us in-store at Forces Flagship McBean. Shop online now at thebesttoys.com. Order via call or WhatsApp at 332-BABY. And remember, we have the best toys at the best prices.
People really want to know, what about me? Where do I fit?
Yes.
What is in the ride for me in terms of a better Trinidad and Tobago? And I'm pleased to shed some light on that.
The purpose of bail is to ensure your attendance at court. That's it. It is not punitive. It is not rehabilitative.
We, the police officers, we are professional, and we are here for whenever the survivor is ready to come forward.
We have the right to private and family life, the right to religious freedoms and beliefs and thoughts and expression. But these rights are not absolute. Certain rights can be limited.
The law is to govern the whole, it's for all of us in public.
Join me, Sule A. Joseph, as I delve into the day-to-day psychological issues plaguing our society, we will discuss behaviors that encompass the biological influences, social pressures, and environmental factors that affect how you think, act, and feel. Set. Thursdays at 11:30 a.m. only on WESN, Content Capital.
It may seem like the hardest thing to do right now, but we all need each other to wear a mask, wash our hands, watch our physical distance, and stay at home. We need you safe. Together we can make the difference. Together we can curb the spread of COVID-19. So let's be responsible in our actions. The Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross Society. Mission-based, people-focused, community-driven.
Welcome back to Talking Point here on WESN. So, the Education Facilities Company Limited. It was established in 2005 under the Patrick Manning government. Now, its specialty was, of course, project management in relation to construction. And its mandate was to construct and maintain schools from ECCE all the way up until the secondary level. And it actually did that. Its responsibilities also included the textbook rental program. Now, during its tenure from 2005 up until 2018, when its responsibilities were shifted to that of the MTS company, which effectively made EFCL redundant anyway, they were actually achieved a lot between 2005 and 2018. They constructed over 130 new schools, and they carried out over 8,000 maintenance jobs, and the textbook rental program was deemed a success. It allowed students or underprivileged students to access the textbooks that were on the curriculum in order to complete their studies. However, this has been a major downfall for a company which was actually succeeding and working at one point. And that's not according to me or according to us here. That's actually according to the former employees who refer to those days as the glory days. So this morning we'll be exploring that just very briefly, because we've explored it up until the fact that I believe about a week ago, a specific company led by a specific individual, and I'm being rather vague when I'm saying that. So the company is NH International. Its chairman is Emile Elias. Interestingly enough, received just about $18 million in a judgment against the Education Facilities Company Limited, and the Education Facilities Company Limited didn't even mount a defense. And this judgment was passed, and all of a sudden we heard that EFCL is shutting down, which means the responsibilities now go to the corporation sole, which falls under the Ministry of Finance. So, by some coincidence, this has transpired, and you have to wonder whether or not there was some sort of inside information that this was going to take place, which allowed this case to be expedited, in my opinion, given the state of our criminal justice system, and this judgment to be passed. Because if that is the case, what is going to happen to all the other contractors that are still owed money? Are they having to sue the corporation sole, which is the Ministry of Finance? Or are they still able to effectively enact some sort of case against the Education Facilities Company Limited? But putting all that aside, 70 employees shown received their termination letter, and many of them haven't been paid since last year, October.
So apparently the EFCL is not officially wound up and shut down, so I think they might still be able to sue EFCL directly until that process is finished. However, we would assume that that process would be coming sooner rather than later. With regards to the employees, there's one report where they were not paid since October. Now they're retrenched. I will say this, if you cannot pay them and you have moved their duties on to another company, then criticisms aside to how we got to this point, to some extent, yes, you should at the very least, give them your plans or intentions, if that includes retrenchment, etc. How the retrenchment was managed, I don't necessarily have an opinion on, because, okay, they receive letters. What does it mean with their severance packages? Do they not get severance packages, etc., etc.? but at least the employees are not in limbo, which is a very, 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 very minor consolation prize to what their expectations probably were, and which is to be allowed to continue to do their job, as you say, which was being done. The real question to me is, what happened to a public sector entity that had important responsibilities? Let's just remember, even before this pandemic, there have been questions with regards to our education system at the tip of the tongue of a lot of parents with regards to just how it's running, with regards to how the Ministry of Education was determining syllabus, with regards to some teachers that I have spoken to whose jobs have been made much more difficult. And I'm not talking about somebody who now started teaching. I'm talking about teachers who have been, perennial. They've been doing this job for about at least a couple decades by now, if not more. They have been there and done that, seen almost everything except now a syllabus that has been changing year to year and increasing the workload, not just for the students, but the capacity of the teachers to get education to the students have been made more difficult. So we have all of these questions with regards to our education system. Now the body that's supposed to be managing the facilities, managing textbook rental, managing the maintenance and the construction. Why did it collapse? Because maintenance and construction of new schools has not been an error that was solved and put to rest. In the past, it was ongoing up until the pandemic. And if it was not for the pandemic, that might have been a continuing issue.
Well, before we get a bit carried away in terms of the education system, and I understand because we are very passionate about this topic, coming back to EFCL on Tuesday, the Communication Workers Union held a press conference. Now, that is a bit surprising to me. I can only assume that they're the union representing the workers.
Yeah.
Whether or not there is a union to represent the workers. But according to Susan St. Bernard, a former employee who received her termination letter on Monday, and I'm quoting directly from the press conference, it states from Susan St. Bernard, and I quote, "Be fair to us. All we did was follow instructions and guidelines handed down to us." She stated that another co-worker actually on the part of Susan St. Bernard, Vanessa Higley, recounted the success during EFCL's early days, dismissing negative commentary on social media, stating, and this is very, very important to somebody who was on the inside, the public was not privy to all the facts. The public was not privy to all the facts. Now, I don't expect Vanessa Higley to now speak out everything. She's still to collect her salary. She still needs to collect money that's owed to her for work that would have been done. However, it would be interesting to know what all the facts were. She stated that EFCL was a project management outfit tasked with earning an income for itself, which is what I think I explained last week, how they operate and how they earn an income for themselves. But she said cabinet all the way down would land at EFCL. Every project we engaged in was sanctioned. It was not projects that EFCL started on its own. So by her stating this, a former employee stating this now goes back to everything that we've heard about EFCL within at least the last 2 years. It's been very quiet. It came to news, it came as a surprise to us that late last year we received information that the operations of the company, or at least its mandate, was now under the MTS company. What is interesting though is if all the projects were sanctioned, all this so-called corruption that took place, and everything we've heard in relation to Arnold Pigott, and I'd just like to make it known right now that yesterday, we tried to contact the Chief Executive Officer of the Education Facilities Company Limited and the chairman, and calls went unanswered. And adding to that, questions were asked towards the Minister of Education, Dr. Naya Gatsby-Dolly. She said, well, ask the Minister of Finance. The Minister of Finance and the Ministry of Finance are yet to actually come out and state that, yes, this is true. They are yet to actually come out and verify that the letters were given out. They were actually yet to come out and state that EFCL is shutting down.
Which is beyond ridiculous, because either it's true or it's false. And delaying commentary on the veracity of the letters is not going to change the reality of it. So what is the point? Because you're getting the negative press, right? If it's false, come out and say it's false. There's nothing to be gained by just keeping your mouth shut, except the only thing I could figure is that Cabinet does not know what to do with a situation anymore. They've run out of ideas and they just don't. Nobody wants to put themselves out there to try to speak to this. It's similar to some of the commentary we've had on the show with regards to Paria. Stuart Young is the reluctant soldier to go out there because the border is a waste of time, right? It's similar to what we've heard about how the government operates. Not a lot of the ministers, whether they're the actual frontline minister or the minister in the ministries, really take any initiative to do much of anything. So we have an issue here because the EFCL was supposed to be profitable because it did project management for the Ministry of Education, correct?
Yes.
So the government is the sole source of its income. We don't know if EFCL failed because the projects were, one, mismanaged. There's no evidence or narrative saying that. Two, projects were sanctioned. So if EFCL can't determine the projects, how are they supposed to properly manage it and keep costs down if they're getting instructions from on high, do this, do that, do the other? What's the point of having management? They're not management. They're just overseers and gophers to facilitate nepotism, corruption, or what have you. Or just ministers who want to get things done to look good in the press and don't actually care about managing the situation effectively and efficiently and responsibly. Right? So the question you posed already when we found out that MTS is taking over EFCL's duties. And they have run into revenue issues with regards to cash flow coming in to pay for the work being done. What's to prevent MTS now from devolving into the situation?
Well, from what I understand, MTS has already started to fall within that pit. They've already started to slide on that slope because they themselves are incurring cost and the ministry is not releasing money. But just to also, add further to this, we understood that the operations of EFCL became redundant, their mandate, since everything went under the MTS. So that's understood. But between 2018 and 2022, it's interesting workers were not paid, at least since last year. But hold on. And what I'd like to know is that the chairman and the chief executive officer, the chief financial officer, and the corporate secretary, whether or not those individuals that fall under the company were given a salary, given that the employees that fall under them were not paid. In fact, they were due to be paid, I believe, either yesterday or Tuesday, and then outstanding money up until that point would have been given at the end of March. And up until now, we haven't heard that taking place. So did the chair, and you remember, Sean, the chairman and chief executive officer, as much as the government wants to argue that these are positions that usually the Public Service Commission will hire, they're politically appointed. So did they receive their salaries?
More importantly, we have to wonder if there's any violation of labor law here. Because the employees were not made redundant because their positions within the company were redundant. They were made redundant because the duties of a public entity was transferred to another public entity for no reason stated publicly that we could find, for no justification. So I would just like to know, what is now going to stop the government from just transferring WASA's duties to some other entity and then making all of WASA redundant? So I applaud the communication workers unions for speaking out on this. But where's all of the rah-rah-rah of this union alliance and that trade federation and et cetera, because I would imagine once you let the first domino fall and you let the precedent be set that this sort of action could happen, what's to stop the new Natural Water Resources Authority from taking over WASA's duties, and then you just let WASA stew there? Because we don't exactly know why EFCL has reached this point, but the mere fact that it's not as though EFCL collects dues from the public. That's not their business model. Utilities, that's utilities' business model. So you could ask legitimate questions as to why they are in the red. EFCL's entire revenue stream is to manage projects from the government. So the government has had a hand in allowing this to get out of control, and there's no explanation forthcoming.
Anyway, as we conclude on this particular subject, and we hope to explore this a bit further, I just have one more question, and that is, again, why did EFCL mount no defense in the lawsuit brought forward by NH International and its chairman, Emile Elias? In fact, this case was brought forward late last year. He received judgment to the tune of 18 million last week. How was this possible? By any chance, so I must be careful what I state here, because we don't have any sort of privileges in terms of protection. But I'm curious to know, considering the relationship that is understood between Emile Elias and the government, was there any sort of inside knowledge or inside information? Because somehow or the other, he was able to receive funds.
Or just preferential treatment.
But which in itself is inside information.
He got a judgment.
He got, yes.
That's
but
debt on the
EFCL
books. Have they actually released those funds?
That's one thing. The mere fact is the legal judgment is there.
Yes.
The legal judgment is there. EFCL didn't mount a defense. They didn't. So he is to receive that money. Whether or not he's received it as yet, we don't know. But what does this mean for other contractors? Why can't the Minister of Education speak on EFCL when they have not officially shut down? And furthermore, why has the Ministry of Finance, the Corporation Sole, been silent on this entire issue and matter, not even verifying the fact that EFCL was going to apply for bankruptcy? And that goes back again to individuals not receiving monies owed to them, yet somehow or the other, this individual, this company, received it. Amazing, isn't it? Put the pieces together and you'd realize something is rather fishy here. Anyway, folks, let's take a break here now on Talking Point. When we return, we're going to dive into the topic of Russia and Ukraine, because there are impacts for the Caribbean, but exactly what is it? Well, when we return, hopefully we answer that question. Stay tuned to Talking Point here on WESN, the Content Capital.
Alexa, can you play my song, please?
Every day across Trinidad, Flow is connecting communities near and far. Our dedicated teams are always working to keep you connected to the world beyond your doorstep. Improving internet accessibility across Trinidad, one home at a time.
At Flow, we work hard for you, so you work hard for your family on the largest high-speed network.
Connecting you to more every day with Flow.
In these COVID times, things are a little different. You may have some skepticism when it comes to going to the hospital or going into the doctor because of crowds or because of so many people being present. We are now in the world of telemedicine.
Telemedicine is the innovation of using technology to treat patients at a distance.
Zakia is here today. She's going to show us a little bit of what she does as part of her at-home exercise routine. What's up, Doc? Tuesdays and Thursdays here on WESN, Content Capital.
Is it politics? What is it? Is it that nobody cares about sports?
The kind of support that sport used to get in the past is no longer here.
The thing is, taking a knee doesn't mean that that's the only thing you're doing on it.
Right.
Taking a knee along with other stuff.
Samantha, what are you looking forward to when you return home to Trinidad and Tobago after winning the title?
Thank you very much for speaking it into existence.
Is it no pressure on Nicholas Paul?
It makes me more motivated to work hard and to go out there and rep the white and black.
Why are we sending a team to the Winter Olympics?
There are a number of Trinbagonians who are in the diaspora and have grown up in winter sport. It's an opportunity that the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee will not close the door on.
I also believe in the players that we have. Once you can motivate the players, you can get the best out of them.
A reminder from WESN, we urge you to protect yourself and others from the spread of COVID-19. Stay safe by taking some simple precautions. Clean your hands often. Use soap and water or an alcohol-based hand rub. Maintain a safe distance from anyone who is coughing or sneezing. Wear a mask. Don't touch your eyes, nose, or mouth. Cover your nose and mouth with your bent elbow or a tissue when you cough or sneeze. Stay at home. If you have a fever, cough, and difficulty breathing, seek medical attention. Following the above can help us all to help each other.
Welcome back to Talking Point here on WESN. Now, this morning we will be exploring the Russian-Ukrainian war and the Caribbean. And joining us for that conversation to give us some more information, educate us with their expertise, we're joined by Professor Andy Knight, who is in Alberta, Canada. Good morning, Professor Knight, and thank you for joining us on Talking Point.
Good morning, and thanks for having me. Actually, I'm in New Haven, in Connecticut, rather than Alberta. I know I'm a professor at University of Alberta, but I'm doing a Fulbright fellowship at Yale University in New Haven. So that's where I am today.
Wonderful. Well, I suppose that's one of the perks of having studied international relations and now teaching it. So excellent on your part, sir. But to get straight into the conversation, because there's a lot that we can explore. First of all, in terms of this war and in terms of the Caribbean, now we understand that there can be economic effects towards the Caribbean. I mean, we've seen the price of crude oil rise to just over $119 a barrel, which is the highest it's been in almost 10 years. That the economic effects is one thing, but let's focus on a moment geopolitically. And let's use the example of Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, to the southeast first, we have Venezuela. And more so, we have the North American influence within the Caribbean. We've also seen the Venezuelan leader, according to the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, show his support to Russia and their military operations. Geopolitically speaking, how is this going to impact upon us? Trinidad and Tobago and by extension the Caribbean, and do we need to be strategic in our response to any sort of support on the part of Venezuela, Cuba, and by extension, our relationship with the European Union and North America?
That's a good question. You know, I think because this conflict is happening so far away from the Caribbean, some people may think that it has very little relevance to the Caribbean, but in fact, we live in a globalized world. The Caribbean is probably one of the most globalized areas of the world. When you think about how colonization had brought the Portuguese, the French, the Spanish, the Dutch, the British, I mean, to the region. So we understand the nature of this kind of crisis and the impact it could have on the region. And of course, you just mentioned as well that we're next door to Venezuela. And Venezuela is a good ally of Russia. So, you know, back in 2018, I think it was, when the United States and Russia were on a sort of a collision course over Venezuela, the Russians sent 2 major fighter jets to Venezuela just to show the Americans that they can operate in the backyard of the United States. Mm-hmm. But that affected the region. You know, it affected CARICOM, it affected Trinidad and Tobago, which is next door. So I think that this crisis, while it's happening so far away, does have an impact on the Caribbean region. You mentioned the economy, right? It's going to have a major impact on inflation. There is a challenge now because of the sanctions being placed on Russia that could have a biting effect on not just on Russia, but on the countries that support Russia. So the Caribbean will have some impact for sure.
Well, Professor Knight, just to follow up on that question, I mean, we saw a special sitting of the UN General Assembly in order to vote against Russia's actions. And it's significant because it's a moral response, a moral part in the United Nations. But interestingly enough, we had five nations actually voting against this, which included Venezuela and Cuba. Now, India and China abstained from voting. But going back to that strategic response, people have spoken out against Russia and supported Ukraine. Down here in Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension the Caribbean, we've seen a lot of support for Ukraine. How is it that we are supporting Ukraine while still trying to maintain the neutrality in terms of our relationships with Venezuela? Because Trinidad and Tobago's government has a good relationship with the Venezuelan government. How do we go about trying to keep that level of understanding and perhaps negotiate peace?
Well, first of all, you have to remember that Caribbean countries are members of the United Nations. They've signed on to the UN Charter. And I think it's important for them to demonstrate that any attack on a sovereign state is actually a violation of the principles of the United Nations Charter. So Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Jamaica, most of the Caribbean countries will take that position because they are members of the United Nations. You know, today it's Ukraine. Tomorrow it could be some other country that's being violated in this way. So they have to show important contributions to the United Nations by supporting the principles of the United Nations, principles of sovereign equality, the principles of human rights, which are being violated on a daily basis now by Russia. The possibility of ethnic cleansing and the creation of a refugee crisis, because right now over 1 million Ukrainians have left Ukraine and gone to Poland and different countries because they're now refugees. So I think the Caribbean countries understand the importance of supporting the United Nations as a global governance organization, and while at the same time maintaining some sort of friendly relationships with Venezuela, despite the fact that Venezuela is one of the supporters of Russia.
Professor Nigel Michael Small here. I want to go now to the economic side of it. You mentioned that the sanctions to Russia might have a biting effect that alludes to the rest of the world taking some of the hit. I guess because of global trade is the basic answer. But could you just explain some of the basics with regards to how these sanctions then could domino into economic effects that might affect us even here in the Caribbean?
Well, first of all, let's look at the effects of sanctions now on Russia. It's something that Putin, I don't think, had calculated very well before he sort of invaded Ukraine. Now we see a cascade of private and public rejections of Russia because of the sanctions. The sanctions that are being imposed are what they call smart sanctions. They're targeted sanctions. They're targeting mostly the leadership of Russia, including Putin himself. They're targeting the oligarchs, Putin's allies and Putin's friends, essentially, closing down their bank accounts, freezing their assets, etc. And they're also isolating major Russian banks. Some of those banks have businesses and investments in the Caribbean and different parts of the world. So that's going to have an impact on how those banks operate in those countries if those sanctions are hurting, and they seem to be hurting the Russian private sector. Also, there is as well a number of effects because of these sanctions. For example, Rosneft is being affected by this. FedEx and UPS have stopped shipping to Russia. Apple has stopped selling products in Russia. There's major sports organizations that refuse to do business now with Russia, and they're being kicked out left, right, and center from Russia's being kicked out left, right, and center from these organizations. Even the owner of Chelsea has decided to sell his stake in the football club in the UK. because he is linked personally to Putin. So this is having a major impact on the Russian economy, the Russian public and private sector, and also as a corollary is going to have an impact on countries like Venezuela, perhaps even Cuba, that operate within the region. So I think that while the effect is not direct on many Caribbean countries, it's a kind of an indirect effect as the economies slow down, even beyond the pandemic. So we have a pandemic that's really affected the economies of the region. I know we have this new set of sanctions on Russia that could have a sort of an indirect effect on Caribbean economies.
Actually, Professor Knight, just to add to that question, how much of an opportunity is this now for China and its influence within the Caribbean? Because again, China themselves have been playing quite an interesting game. Whilst they have not directly referred to this as a war, and they have not directly condemned the actions of Russia, they've abstained in any vote brought forward by the United Nations, whether it be the Security Council or the General Assembly. So China themselves are playing a game, and adding to that, are we going to see more of a Chinese influence within the Caribbean now, seeing that Russia seems to be more and more secluded from the Western world?
Well, I think China is playing a wait-and-see game here. On the one hand, it wants to support the principles of the United Nations Charter because that could have an impact on their own sovereignty. So it has to be critical a little bit about the fact that Ukraine's sovereignty is being violated. At the same time, it wants to maintain support for Russia. So it's playing a kind of a sitting on the fence game. It's almost like a funambulist, a tightrope walker who walks on the tightrope and is trying to sort of, balance itself, trying to sort of appease both sides. So I don't know if that's going to work very well, but the one thing I know that it will do is that the Chinese are waiting for opportunities like this to have a bigger foothold in places like the Caribbean. Already, the Belt and Road Initiative, which used to be, used to be affecting infrastructural projects in places like Africa and Asia and even parts of East Europe, is now also being implemented in the Caribbean and Latin America. So the Chinese have an interest in operating in the US's backyard as well, and the Caribbean countries are in that backyard. So I think that this is a good opportunity for China to sort of wait and see what's happening, but at the same time use this crisis as a means of gaining greater support in a region like the Caribbean that will be affected by this.
Professor, we've seen now the invasion cause a lot of goods that either came from Ukraine or flowed from Ukraine. Eventually, that business has stopped. The shortages have further compounded the inflation we've seen from the pandemic. Now, with these economic sanctions against Russia, we could probably see the same thing with Russian goods and services. Slowly but surely, it will dry up being exported. The revenue from their imports will dry up. Will these sanctions leveraged against Russia make it difficult for Russia to reintegrate into the world markets? Because the diplomatic tensions, I believe, we don't necessarily know when the heat of the moment will cool down and allow diplomacy to really come back and settle the issues.
That's a very good point you raise. I mean, the inflationary pressures you're already seeing happening because of the pandemic is now going to be increased now as a result of this global crisis that's being created because of the sanctions. So I think Caribbean countries are going to feel the pinch of these inflationary pressures. The price of everything is going to go up. The price of oil and gas will go up. In many cases, we may have to depend on oil and gas from places like Canada to replace what you used to get from Russia, for example, in North America. So this is having that kind of inflationary effect on the economy, on the global economy. And I think the Americans recognize this as well, and the Caribbean countries should recognize that as well. So we have to sort of hold on to our hats a little bit and hope that we can get out of this crisis as soon as possible. That's one of the reasons why, I've been pushing the notion that these countries need to sit down and talk to each other rather than fight. And I think we've seen earlier this week, President Putin seems to be leaning towards dialogue with President Zelensky. And I think this is a good sign, although, there's still bombardments of Ukrainian cities. I think at the end of the day, we're hoping that President Putin will pull back from the cliff and sort of have a diplomatic solution to the problem.
Professor Knight, as you were mentioning the economy, in relation to that in itself, we understand that inflation will rise. And as you mentioned, we're going to have to sit back for a bit because there are tough times ahead. But precisely now we're seeing probably lower exports due to the war coming in from Ukraine in terms of grain and perhaps Russian steel or Russian minerals as well. We may see lowering in that exports as well. How will that directly impact upon small island developing states? Will it halt the development of these states?
Already, we've seen how the pandemic, for example, has slowed down the economies of Caribbean states. With global inflationary pressures now, we can see a further slowdown on Caribbean states. Even tourism might be affected. Certainly exports and imports will be affected by this. So Caribbean countries, as you know, being small island states, are already very vulnerable to economic crises. They're also vulnerable to climate change issues. They're vulnerable to a number of what they call manifold vulnerabilities. So this is going to be just a pile on to the number of vulnerabilities that we already face. Things from hurricanes to volcanoes and so on, along with this new economic problem that happened as a result of the pandemic. Lots of businesses have been closed down. They're now trying to reopen these businesses. The economies is just starting to pick back up when this crisis hit. So this is just a double whammy for Caribbean states. And I'm very sorry to see this happen at the time when we should be looking forward to a reopening of the economies and a re-engaging with the global economy. We're now going to have to be worried about how this is going to impact our own economies.
But sorry, Sean, go ahead.
Professor Knight, one of the things, though, that I am concerned about, and a lot of defense experts are, is that China has also been ramping up its military growth, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people are looking at Taiwan. I think Russia's invasion might be a sign that the world, or at least some elements of the world, might be a bit more willing to use force and hostility in order to get what they want. Is there any sort of concern, and I'm asking you to be a little bit speculative here, but we've had a global integration for all this time, and maybe we've taken for granted what a wonderful event that was in human history. But is there any concern that we might see a bit of a divide now, essentially going back to East versus West, so to say, as lines are being drawn in the international community, economically, politically, and potentially militarily?
You raise a very good question that's sort of related to the broader context, I think, of this crisis. This is not just about Russia-Ukraine war. This is also about the fact that we are living at this moment in what I call an interregnum. This is a period of time where we're moving away from the world order of 1945, which is being challenged left, right, and center. And we're moving towards a different kind of world order. And this is, we see the sort of shifts in hegemony as the United States has been reducing its footprint as a hegemonic country globally. Russia has been increasing its footprint. This is obviously a challenge for the international community because this is an unstable period. This is a disequilibrium within the international system that we are facing right now. And this disequilibrium is an opportunity for some countries to take advantage of this instability and move up the ladder of the international hierarchy. And I think China is doing that right now very successfully. You mentioned Taiwan, and I want to let the audience know that, I think it was yesterday, Taiwan has supported the sanctions that are placed on Russia. In fact, Taiwan supports Ukraine in this effort. And that's a very important step because Taiwan is demonstrating that despite Russia's claims of Taiwan being part of the mainland China, Taiwan does have an independent voice and is proving itself to be able to do that. And that could cause a problem, as you know, because China thinks that Taiwan is part and parcel of China. So if Russia is successful in carrying out these kinds of violations of the principles of the UN Charter, who is to say that China would not do the same? Who is to say that other countries wouldn't do the same eventually? So I think that's why it's so important for us to go back to the principles of the Charter and support those principles.
And I think just to point out, people need to understand, diplomatically, Taiwan's status is very, very up in the air. Taiwan itself does not do that much to declare its independence openly for diplomatic reasons.
But as you mentioned, a shift in tide in terms of the hegemony, and we're seeing the balances being tipped. Global powers and global superpowers were not what they used to be. How important is it, because you also mentioned diplomacy, how important is it with this taking place now? This is not the beginning of a shift in terms of the hegemony, but this is just probably exacerbating the situation a bit further. How important is it now for the Caribbean and Caribbean states to remain neutral diplomatically and in terms of diplomacy?
Very good. First of all, Caribbean states are small island developing states, and you have to put that in the proper context. They're not powerful. They don't have the kind of military weaponry and economic might of some of the other powers. So it's very important for Caribbean states to remain united in CARICOM in terms of its diplomacy. And I think this is a very important crisis for the Caribbean countries to hold together and remain united, and to show that even although they're small states and they're very vulnerable states, they're still able to punch above their weight at the international level. And one way to do this, of course, is to support the principles of the UN Charter. One way to do this is to remain relatively neutral, because as you know, the United States is no different from Russia when it comes to invading another country. You know that the United States have invaded Afghanistan, they've invaded Iraq, they've invaded Venezuela, they've invaded Mexico at some points, they've invaded several different countries in the Caribbean region, Latin America, and they've supported, in some cases, very autocratic regimes. So the United States really, it's kind of hypocritical for the United States to criticize Russia right now, because they've done some very similar things. So it's important for the Caribbean to maintain its moral and ethical neutrality when it comes to both Russia and the United States. At the same time, criticizing both sides for violating principles of the United Nations Charter, because that's the only way that we can maintain our integrity as small island developing states, is to support the UN Charter, go against anyone that tries to violate the principles of the Charter, because it will affect us eventually. So this is a long-term diplomatic move on the part of Caribbean states, I think, to remain as neutral as possible, at the same time lending their support to Ukraine, because that country as a sovereign state is being
all right, Professor Knight,
violated.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. I don't know, very quickly, in a yes or no, is this an opportunity to strengthen CARICOM in itself?
I think so. I think this is an opportunity for CARICOM to be strengthened, but we need proper leadership within CARICOM for that to happen.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Professor
you,
Andy
Professor.
Knight. Appreciate your time and your expertise. I know you're very busy, but do keep well and all the very best.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Folks, WSN now breaks for news on the hour.
7 is out. All day is in. WESN News on the hour.
Every day, we communicate through stories. Stories of ourselves, our challenges, our goals, our experiences, and our aspirations. Storytelling is an art that we have mastered. WESN Film Studios comprises a collaborative team of experts with extensive industry experience locally, regionally, and internationally. The ability of your business to successfully communicate with your preferred audience depends on the strength of the stories you tell. Your vision should be communicated in a high-quality, professional, and creative way. From concept to post-production, advertising to film, multi-camera productions, live events, streaming, and virtual conferencing, we are WESN Film Studio. Let your own unique voice be heard and your vision realized. Call us today at 628-5835 for your next production.
In this season, we talk more about health, wellness, and everything in between. I am so excited to share with you everything about health and wellness so that you can design the life that you've always dreamed of. Join me here on What's Up Doc.
What's Up Doc? Tuesdays and Thursdays here on WESN, Content Capital.
Is it politics? What is it? Is it that nobody cares about sports?
The kind of support that sport used to get in the past is no longer here.
The thing is, taking a knee doesn't mean that that's the only thing you're doing now, Andre.
Right.
Taking a knee along with other stuff.
Samantha, what are you looking forward to when you return home to Trinidad and Tobago after winning the title?
Thank you very much for speaking it into existence.
Is it no pressure on Nicholas Paul?
It makes me more motivated to work hard and to go out there and rep the white and black.
Why are we sending a team to the Winter Olympics?
There are a number of Trinbagonians who are in the diaspora and have grown up in winter sport. It's an opportunity that the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee will not close the door on.
I also believe in the players that we have. Once you can motivate the players, you can get the best out of them.
Let your voice be heard. Call Madam Fix-It on WESN, the only place that effectively helps you with your woes. Having problems getting onto government agencies, water woes, NIS and pension problems, potholes, and much, much more. Call me, Madam Fix-It, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, right here on WESN. Let me fix it for you.
It may seem like the hardest thing to do right now, but we all need each other to wear a mask, wash our hands, watch our physical distance, and stay at home. We need you safe. Together we can make the difference. Together we can curb the spread of COVID-19. So let's be responsible in our actions. The Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross Society. Mission-based, people-focused, community-driven.
Welcome back to Talking Point here on WESN, the Content Capital. I'm Keaton Shaw with Sean Michael Small. We were just joined by Professor Annie Knight to give us more perspective in relation to how the Russian-Ukrainian war can impact and is impacting upon the Caribbean. Folks, we will give you the opportunity now to call in on the program and share with us your thoughts. 623-9376, 622-9338. Call in and join us on the program. I think it is very pertinent to note, very, very important, the last question that Professor Knight answered, and Sean, it's amazing how he answered it. He says, this is an opportunity for CARICOM to strengthen itself, institutional strengthening. However, we need strong leaders in order to achieve that.
Well, and also the pandemic is a reason to motivate as well, on top of what we're going to see compounded by this event. So we have the opportunity, we have more than one area of motive. We do need serious leadership. One of the things spoken about in an article in the news today is the fact that they were talking about the economic impacts of Ukraine. We need to remember that we import the gas that we use for our cars. So the price of oil rising, again, one more area where it's not going to necessarily be beneficial to us. The gains that we're going to see for these higher gas prices, they won't be as considerable as some people might hope. But also, the lack of participation with regards to the conference in Guyana was seen as another missed opportunity by our country. We do have to wonder with regards to the diplomacy of the region, to what extent are regional leaders really taking the requirements seriously and looking at banding together to be a potential solution to a lot of our economic and political problems. Because, as the professor said, we are small, vulnerable nations. As the winds of change blow throughout the world, we will just be freely tossed about by the wind.
Now, I'm glad that you mentioned the energy conference in Guyana. That is extremely important from the fact that Guyana in the future can become one of our stronger trading partners.
Mm-hmm. And from what I understand, and I could be corrected if officially, if this did not happen, that's fine. But we were invited, and we declined.
We were invited. We actually were.
So it's not that Guyana they kept us out.
It was acknowledged, actually,
right,
by our governments. Anyway, good morning, caller from Pity Valley.
Good morning, Sean Keaton.
Good morning.
What the professor said, I agree with. And he said just now, America is no different to Russia.
Ironic, isn't it?
America invaded a lot of countries.
Mm-hmm.
They went down by Saddam. They say he had nuclear weapons. They didn't have Grenada, etc., etc. So we have to dance very careful, in the Caribbean down here, and we are small players, so we have to dance careful. But my point is, America is no different to what Russia is doing.
Well, I will say there's one difference, caller, and that is the leadership changes. So the leadership in democratic countries change.
Mm-hmm.
So in that aspect, it's not the same guy, whether you like Biden or not. He's not the one that went...
Yes, but even though the leadership changes, does the actual...
No, Sean, I do agree that.
Even the military leadership does not last that long. That's the main political difference with America and Russia, because Putin, if he's not removed by force... Well, I mean, he's been there for so long, he'll be there until he probably dies.
Well, he's actually strengthened his...
Xi Jinping is there, North Korea is...
America history, I will disagree with that, but there is no difference.
No, but I'm just talking about a practical reality.
But thank you very much.
They do have elections.
Okay. Thank you very much, caller. So. You have to understand that even though they have elections, and we understand that, the attitude of America never really changes.
Well,
we may have a Democrat or Republican within the seat,
I beg to differ. I actually think that the mistakes that American leadership makes changes as their leaders changes. And that has its own challenges, as we have a different person who has a different agenda, and his agenda might be cause a whole different set of problems.
I think the mistakes, in my opinion, because we have another caller, but I think the mistakes in terms of America remain the same. It's just how they go about getting to that mistake that probably changes. But anyway, good morning, caller from Chaguanas.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Morning, Professor.
I was going to compliment you on your excellent guest until he made his last statement trying to compare America with Russia. I have never known America trying to annex anybody. In fact, they have provisions for people who want to leave the states, and people have tried and they have failed to meet the threshold. And the second point, I hear yesterday Mr. Nigum Martin wanted to be a bit critical of me and was reluctant. I don't know why. I always prepared to accept criticism. I may not allow people to twist me around the place as my questions on property tax have gone. Up to now, I haven't heard whether any technical document was prepared, and if it was, where we could find it. But he's a fellow I always admire, and if he have a query, I will welcome it, even if I don't agree with it. I have learned a long time ago to disagree without being disagreeable. Any questions, gentlemen?
Have a great day,
Or wait till I
Professor.
have
I usually don't have a question, Professor.
You have a question?
No, I don't. I do like to highlight where I agree with him. So, to venture back into the topic, I will use this example. I don't think they do the same mistakes. Iraq, I think, is an interesting case. The people welcomed American intervention. The problem was not the invasion of Iraq. The problem was afterwards. There was no plan. It fell apart because they had no proper plan of what to do after they got rid of Saddam Hussein. And we've seen the results. We've seen the results in Afghanistan as well, of that lack of long-term thinking. It's one thing to intervene in a country militarily, but people still live there, and you can't just, if you're not going to conquer it, in some ways it's a more complex scenario, and if you're not ready to deal with that, you really need to rethink going in the first place.
Have we ever seen any strategic planning in terms of how we're going to end this, considering that people are living there in any territory that the United States has entered?
Let's put it this way. They did go into Germany in World War II, and Germany came out fine because the circumstances were very different.
But you do understand that you're using the example of Germany when you use the example of Iraq, and you do realize it's two different economies and two different states.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying because the situations were different, so as the world evolves, the circumstances around military intervention, they change very differently. Ukraine is going to be a case study in a whole different type of war, but we do have a call on the line from San Fernando.
Good morning, caller.
Gentlemen, morning.
Good morning.
You know, I look at this situation, and America, see the first caller, Sean, that talked to, and I agree with him. Let me just say this. America used the Monroe Doctrine from 1823 to enter Grenada, to enter, to block Cuba when they had the blockade of Cuba in, I think it was 62.
Yeah.
And to enter this country, Panama. And they have said nobody coming in the Western Hemisphere and put a base. But they have poked this thing. America don't care about those people in Ukraine, you know. They have quoted Zelensky living next to a tyrant and knowing that this is going to happen, you know. I am so sorry for those people in Ukraine.
Caller, but do you remember the big stick policy on the part of Woodrow Wilson, in that anyone coming within America's backyard will feel the brunt of the big stick?
Well, but Woodrow Wilson came after the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine was before.
I know, but you recall that as well.
Caller,
yes.
Yeah.
Caller, this is the second.
And before you go, Sean, let me say one other thing. I remember when in an interview with George Bush Sr., he was the president, and the reporter had asked him, I think it was a 60 Minutes some years ago, when he was president, and he said, they asked him, you remember he used to be head of the CIA, and they asked him what really was his job in the CIA, and he said this: to protect the interests of the United States of America by any means necessary. And the reporter said, what do you mean by any means necessary? And he said, we have to answer that this interview over. So we need to understand that a lot of these things a lot of countries are just pawns in this big game that these people, these countries play.
Okay, caller, but I need to ask a couple questions. First of all, this is the second time Grenada was brought up. What was the negative impact of the intervention in Grenada?
The negative impact of the intervention in Grenada?
Yeah, what?
Grenada was a sovereign state.
No, but what was the consequences of it?
Sean, that is not.
No, because as much as we say
Grenada was okay. You looking at the after effect. Grenada was a sovereign state. The people, the uprising in Grenada that came to get rid of Gary, was a people's uprising, you know. The people wanted Maurice Bishop. This is not a situation where the people did not want it, and America came to save the people.
Did the people of Iraq want Saddam Hussein?
As far as I'm aware, Saddam Hussein still had quite a bit of support. It was
quite a bit of support
the United
in
States
Iraq.
and the United Kingdom who
Sean,
said...
Hold on.
We have to look at, you see the geopolitics? You can't nitpick when it comes to geopolitics.
No, but as much as Saddam Hussein might have had supporters, in what capacity? Because during the invasion, there was no civilian uprising against the invasion. It was all support.
All right, I think what the point the caller is trying to make, Sean, and what we need to understand...
I hear what you're saying, you know. I hear what you're saying. But let me say one other thing. You see what Professor and I talk about strengthening CARICOM?
Uh-huh.
That is an illusion. Since we have tried with the Federation, it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
It's a legacy of colonialism. So if you go to the islands, and let me tell you something. I have worked from Dominican Republic straight down to Suriname over a period of 22 years in those islands periodically, all the time. And the people are not united when it comes to CARICOM.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many differences. There is so much animosity for the countries that have, like Trinidad and Tobago at the time, like Jamaica, and then there's so much condescending behavior that those people feel that we have towards them. Because for instance in Jamaica they tell us in Jamaica, you islanders, and that trickles down, you know. So CARICOM is an illusion. And I wish they could get rid of it, quite honest.
But Kola, I fully agree with you in relation to what you're stating on CARICOM. I remember having to do research and study on CARICOM, and exactly what you're saying is exactly what I concluded from my findings. It is an illusion.
I will go...
Thank you,
Kola. I will go further to say that, to me, a lot of these international alliances, like the EU, even like the UN, just shows how difficult it is, because the UN doesn't necessarily have that amount of decisive power to get things done, right? They're just a collection of countries. They'll make some votes and stuff, but notice they can't actually intervene in what's going on in Ukraine right now in any significant material way. But even with the EU and the divisiveness of the EU, right, we have seen other bodies have tremendous difficulties coming together. So I understand that it's not going to be simple. That does not mean that we should not strive for it. Unfortunately, it might be idealistic to strive for it. But the benefits of it, and I do think that if we really want to make significant advancements, it's difficult to go it alone when we're countries of our size.
I'd just like to bring back up the initial statements of what the caller from San Fernando was saying. And I think we need to be fair in understanding and not be combative in our approach. In relation to whether or not there was a civilian uprising in Afghanistan, you're not going to see when the American army is landing in your territory, you're going to see a major civilian uprising.
I said Iraq.
Right? You actually used, well, okay, fine, Iraq. My apologies. Thank you for correcting me. But I think the point that the caller was making in relation to Grenada as well is that the irony that the United States is now standing up and arguing about sovereignty. And it seems as though when the United States government has decided to enact operations, military operations of its own, it does not necessarily respect sovereignty. And that was what the caller from San Fernando was, his argument in relation to Grenada. So you were looking at the negative impact of it. But what we also need to understand is the United States and their arguments now and their stance against Russia versus when their reasoning, in terms of
I
military
was not
operations.
there, right? And Grenada is not a case that I have studied, but from what I understand, it was supported by some elements of the Caribbean, including primarily the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States and the Governor General of Grenada. Now, the Governor General of Grenada supports that might be something to put aside. Right? As much as there's a popular uprising, one could argue we have had those things in Trinidad put down by our own government forces. So with regards to Iraq, one of the things, I don't want to get into it, but usually it's a highly complex situation that had multiple tiers and people just like to crunch it down into one thing. And I don't think that does it justice. As with this invasion that's going on, there's a lot that has led to this point that people should understand, because it implies that it's going to continue even after this is resolved.
Well, I understand in relation to this argument where you're stating that there's a lot that's led to this. I understand that, and maybe perhaps one day if we have enough time we can explore that. But we do have another caller on the line joining us this morning. Good morning, caller.
Oh my God, you see, even if you catch like 30 seconds or 2 seconds of this show, look, you will have gone on to something else now. But
No.
I am so not going to get into Iraq, Grenada, or crimes right now. Keegan, you are looking very sharp this morning, like
Thank
a
you.
bright spark amidst the turmoil.
Thank
For
you.
real. So, I'm just going to say on Russia that now we're seeing they're laying siege to towns, targeting schools, hospitals, universities. I mean, that is like way beyond crazy, just like they did in Aleppo. But I just want to switch back to that thing called COVID. Sean, last week you were asking about the Omicron subvariant, if it was more virulent but than the BA1. But WHO has said that's not more dangerous, but maybe more contagious.
Yes.
Because studies were done across South Africa, Denmark, and the UK where the numbers were really high. And I just want to stress, too, that people are saying it's milder, but that really means it's not an upper respiratory disease. I mean, it is upper respiratory, not lower, and attacking the lungs in a few days, as Delta did. And I heard a soca artist in trying to justify his safe zone. He said the same thing like the fake news media talk show hosts have been saying all along, you know, the armchair scientists, that we like to follow others. And so if everyone is open, then, you know, we just had a safe zone and that's cool. But in Denmark, over 81% of the population was vaccinated, 61% boosted, and where are we? We're still at 50%, and I don't know if we're getting further than that. Again, mixed messaging, poor handling by the government, who knew all along they wanted carnival, even if just to have a taste of their cake and eat it too. Because there was no way, I think, they were going to tell their supporters that there's no carnival.
Yes.
That, coupled with a country where rule breaking, lack of individual or collective responsibility is the norm, Keaton, we have to agree with one of your favorite people, what he said, and he says it every year, Gypsy. He says, Bacchanal is the only word that rhymes with carnival. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's it on this carnival. Thanks.
Thank you very much, caller.
I would just like to point out that it's interesting because we still have people that want to make a political issue of the vaccine itself. They're not making a political issue of necessarily just how the Ministry of Health handles the situation, of the vaccine itself. We are over 50% vaccinated of our entire population, which means that of our entire population, the adult population is over 50% vaccinated. Well over 50%, because the total, I believe, would take into account the children in the population. And yet the majority of people that are dying and are hospitalized are unvaccinated. So that's what we've seen locally.
Now,
but that still doesn't matter. Blame the vaccine.
Since the caller brought up the topic of COVID-19, shifting away from that topic of the vaccine, it is interesting to note what the Minister of Health is stating in relation to the government's response to Taste of Carnival. And the caller said mixed messaging.
Yes.
The Minister of Health, Terence Dialsing, and I'm quoting directly from the press conference yesterday, in which he stated that there was no double standards by the government in relation to the Taste of Carnival, and I quote, "It is up to the owners of these establishments or their operators, as I've said consistently since last year when safe zones first came out, to accept the responsibility, including fines for the conduct of people on their premises." Including fines for the conduct of people on their premises. That's not the Ministry of Health or a government action. The government has put in place this. This is what the government has put in place. What you're now stating is that it's now up to the police and the owners. But you can't say that this is not government makes... Hold on.
Safe zone policy is government
The
policy.
enforcement of the safe zone regulations and or rules, and to determine if the regulations are broken or being breached, and to charge people is the responsibility of the TTPS. So on the part of the government, there's absolutely no double standard.
Would just like to point out, and this is why that letter was so foolish. You publicly, and nobody believes this is the actual reason. I think nobody who's reasonable or critical. You publicly stated the reason why you lost faith in the commissioner was because how he handled the enforcement of the public health regulations. Now you're you're just delegating all the responsibility and potential blame to the TTPS on that very same issue. So I would like, do you have a say in the matter or don't you? It's very simple, because if you don't have a say, then why are you potentially breaching the independence of a service commission to give your personal opinion in a letter?
I'm trying to figure out, before we get too close with the TTPS, I want to go back to the minister basically abdicating the responsibility of his ministry and the responsibilities of the government. You're preaching to the nation this entire time about the importance... Hold on. You're preaching to the nation the entire time about the importance of public health regulations, and we've understood it. We ourselves on Talking Point have pushed that as well. But we also have realized that what's in place no longer makes any sense, because you, the government, has allowed this Taste of Carnival and the events to take place. And I'm glad that the caller from Pity Valley thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm glad there were many others who enjoyed it, but I hope you understand where we're coming from now. The government is now abdicating the responsibility conveniently, because what the Minister of Health did there was not only throw the police service under the bus, but he's now foregoing any responsibility on the part of the government in terms of public health messaging. So, whether or not we take on the minister, it is our duty to listen to what he has to say. Regardless of whether or not it makes sense, if it's enforced, we have to follow it.
Technically speaking, the minister was right with regards to the Ministry of Health does not have the authority over enforcement. As the minister of the Ministry of Health, as a member of cabinet and an MP in the ruling party that controls parliament, government has authority to say what the health regulations are and to with regards to the messaging, with regards to the enforcement of the regulations. There is a Minister of National Security. There is cabinet as a whole, of which he is a part of. So he should have communicated that a lot better. And if he was trying to abdicate responsibility as a member of cabinet, that was somewhat foolish of him. But technically speaking, his ministry is not directly involved in that.
Understand that it is not about whether or not they're responsible for the enforcement. It's about their messaging. And as we always say, their communication. And this is why I state that if there's no double standards on the part of the government, then Terence Dale Singh, you're absolutely fine and you've done a brilliant job as the Minister of Health. Unfortunately, sir, I see it differently. And whilst there was no one way to treat or deal with COVID-19 and the pandemic, and we were learning as we were going along, you rightfully said it. You wear a very large shoe because you tend to suffer from foot and mouth disease. Anyway, folks, this is where we conclude this morning's program. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you very much to Professor Andy Knight for his contribution. And thank you very much to all the callers for their contribution. San Fernando, we had a wonderful debate with you this morning. Please, we look forward to you calling in again tomorrow or any other day after that. Sean Michael Small, a good program once more. Always well having you alongside me in this, need I say, this growing program and the growing viewership.
Well, but the thing is, too, as Professor Knight said, there's a transition. The world order is changing. Some people think of that phrase as nefarious, but there's a practical reality here. Now that we have seen a major war between two large military powers, Ukraine's military is not small relative to a lot of the world, and we've seen the potential confrontation that might escalate from that. Tomorrow is going to be a different day. Coming out of the pandemic, it already was probably going to be a different day. This now compounds all the challenges, so I will reiterate again, maybe it's idealistic of us with regards to CARICOM, but we need to stop trying to do things as we have always done it and look towards something new.
Folks, CARICOM is an illusion, and one day we will explore the weaknesses of CARICOM. There are strengths, but again, it goes back to the strength of our leadership and the strength and unity of a Caribbean people. Unfortunately, we don't have time for that now, but as we conclude, as always, please, in your daily endeavors, stay safe and keep well. Wash your hands, watch your distance, and wear your mask. I'm not telling you to not listen to the Minister of Health. We have a responsibility to do that. But at the same time, always understand when an individual is throwing double standards. Folks, that's it for Talking Points. I'm Keaton Shaw, that's Mr. Shaw Michael Small, and we'll see you again tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.